Good morning. Draw close to the anointed and be anointed as well. That's what the Gemara Shavuos 47b says. It's a beautiful statement. Draw close to the anointed and become anointed as well. Good morning. Sorry you had a hard night, I heard. Good morning. Draw close to the anointed. The sages teach us that we should do that. Let's read the context. What it says is, it quotes the verse in Devarim 1:7. It says, with regard to the verse, as far as the great river, the Euphrates, Shimon ben Tarfon says, although it is not the closest river, the Euphrates is called great in accordance with the adage. Draw close to the one anointed with oil and become anointed as well. Because the Euphrates is close to Eretz Yisrael, it is called great. The school of Rabbi Yishmael taught a similar idea. The servant of a king is like a king. So the Rebbe takes these words from this Gemara. Well, it's also brought in Rashi. I think he uses Rashi from Chumash as the source. But it's the exact same. And Rashi's quoting this Gemara. So the Rebbe brings us in the context to explain what it means, good morning, as we learned yesterday about being wood choppers, woody woodpecker, that if we were told to be woody woodpecker, we would have done that as well. Chop, chop, chop. Good morning. That you may gather in your grain physical sustenance, your wine, tera, your oil, ruach hakodesh. That fits beautifully in. With also the messianic promise that we await so urgently now, about the anointed one being Mashiach, of course. Here it brings the Aramaic phrase. It says, Karav legabe dehina ve'idhan. Come close to the anointed and be anointed as well. Good morning. So we're learning like Rabbi Shmuel, but he has a similar idea. It's another mashal. The servant of a king is like a king. So a king is, of course, is anointed. So how did you get anointed? Because you're serving the king. The Rebbe uses this idea to elicit our ultimate attainment. What? To be, what do we say? Chopped liver. That's our ultimate attainment. We have to be a slave. Eved, melech. Slave of a king, guess what? He's anointed just being in his presence. You're anointed as well. And of course, how much more so serving it, which is the whole point of an eved, a servant. So the Rebbe says, Ervert ein zach mitzias hamelach. He becomes one with the existential reality of the king, Kaviyachal. He becomes one with what God is at that moment. Good morning. Since you're completely nullified to God, guess who you become? It doesn't say actually Kemelech. It says Eved Melech Melech. They translated here a bit wrong. It should say, they say, the servant of a king is like a king. Okay? So the actual idea is you are the king. That's the point of the Rebbe here. Evert ein zach mitzias hamelach. Whatever you are is totally nullified now to something much higher than you. And therefore you are that higher thing. That's who you are. You attain not a new identity, but an identity that was much deeper, that was always there, and now is being revealed. So how is that revealed? In your servitude. So you have to understand what servitude is, so you don't say, okay, I'm going to flip up on that idea. So we're going to read the beautiful words of the Rebbe about this. And I couldn't get my Sefaria.org to bring up the commentary or something, so I couldn't actually physically look into the regular commentaries more depth. So I thought I would just read this with you. I could do the Yum Yum also, which is beautiful and it fits in totally with yesterday's class. Because we spoke about the 613 mitzvahs, or it's all the will of God. Don't bundle them up at all. There's just one mitzvah. They're all bundled up together. You can't, actually this is completely opposite ideas. On the one hand, you can't bundle mitzvahs because you have to recognize they're all unique. And on the other hand, there's only one. So it's really two different ways of looking at it completely. So, but there's two aspects to how you're going to be shown appreciation from God from doing his commands. Okay, remember, that's the idea of servitude. So, but there's two ways that's appreciation is expressed. It's called reward. Okay? We don't like to say the term reward so much anymore, at least from my cultural standpoint. It's not a word that we use to speak about something that's heroic. A reward is like a very cheap thing, like you get a reward for handing in a coupon. So I think the idea of reward, schar, is actually supposed to be understood as a showing of appreciation from the reason why you did it. You did it for God, so therefore God shows your appreciation. Very simple. Now, how does that appear? It says in today's Yom of Kaf Hei Iyar, the 25th of Iyar, it sounds like this. The Alter Rebbe in the year Tafkuf Nun Hei in Liozna said, Schar mitzvah mitzvah. It says in Pirkei Avos, the reward of a mitzvah is a mitzvah. Okay. It's a good deal. What does it mean? The reward of a mitzvah is a mitzvah. Ha-mitzvah be'etzim atzmusai, the very concept of what the mitzvah is, what is it? He has schar v'hiskalas atzmus tiyeh lasid. It is the reward and the revelation ha'atzmus tiyeh lasid. There's actually two stages. One, you get a particularized reward, and one, you get a general reward. The general reward is like, I did this for God. God loves me. That's in the future come. We'll see what that means. But the other one is, you showed me that you're going to sanctify some part of your body, and I'm going to show you back reward in that area. So if you need money, you give charity. Okay, very simply. Every single thing that you do is an expressive of a type of health that you draw into your world when you do it. So therefore, when you give charity, it gives you a much more healthy approach to the meaning of money and the source of money. Because the idea of charity, of course, is that it's not yours. The idea is that God gave part of what he gave you to pass on to others. It's not just about what I have. Charity represents that idea, and therefore that's a healthy mindset. It will bring health to your world in the area of parnasa, of livelihood. Why? Because God's the one who's creating the narrative of your life. So that's the way he wants to communicate to you. So his appreciation for you is expressed, yes, in the very particular sense that when you do a mitzvah, like bris milah, that means you sanctified a part of your body that could be used for something that's completely meaningless. And now it has a preoccupation that could be holy in a certain context, in a certain way, with healthy attitudes towards it. So this is called the schar mitzvah and the keren kayemes shel mitzvah. You get interest in the bank, and then you get the principal on a mortgage, for example. So the side benefits, the interest that you get every month, is analogous to the particularized ways that you communicate with God. So if you, eat matzah on Pesach, you'll have your kishkas will be perfect for the whole year, or something. I don't know what. Or if you drink wine, because you risk getting a headache. If you drink so much wine, you won't have a headache for the rest of the. Okay, it didn't happen to the sage that the story's about. He drank too much on Pesach, but every year he drank on Pesach, even though it meant the headache for the entire year to follow. So that's a bit hard to understand. And here in this Yom Yom, something we know makes sense, is that you have two things. You have perisel, the fruits of it. You get that now. So Vehu b'chol mitzvah b'inyana. And that applies to every mitzvah in its particular area. You're going to learn Torah, your mind's going to think properly. I don't know. Everything you do is reciprocated in a particular way to show that God's in charge of every single detail. So therefore, the perfection in your life should be seen. And you just got to be you have to look very deep. Sometimes people who suffer have to look even deeper and sometimes beyond themselves entirely to understand how that they could have such a horrible life, God forbid. So, but that's a consolation that we'll see. So that's the way I want to interpret reward, as consolation and affirmation and showing of appreciation from God to us. So you have it particularized for every mitzvah b'inyana in a way that's very literarily perfect. Every single mitzvah, whatever that area is, whatever it represents, will go well for you. When you need that thing, you're answered in that thing. Okay. So he gives a beautiful story, very lengthy story with all the names and all the details about like a whole page and a half of that, about how this guy wanted to give everything to the Rebbe, and that was his whole life. And how these people in this culture are seen to be heroic because they were simple and good. And they lived when they saw a Rebbe who had real integrity, they just said, I want to be the slave of that person. Not in that sense, but I'm just trying to get the idea to be Eved Melech Melech. To nullify yourself towards someone's ratzon because you recognize that they are really the king. And what does that do to that person? It makes him the king. So he doesn't become the chopped liver. He doesn't become the desert that we spoke about, I think, 2 days prior, or 2 days ago. But he becomes the king. In the words of the Rebbe, Vert ein zach mit Metzias HaMelech kaviyachol. Ve'al derech der perish hayidua in Chassidus. So now I'm just going to go through this with you. I might turn off this bright iPad because I just maybe want to... Did I read these poems to you the other day very, very quickly? A tree falls, the sound on earth that follows. So what follows when the earth finally, its condition for continuity was affirmed at the giving of the Torah? Yara v'shakata. It feared and then it was quieted. So when the tree fell, when the earth trembled and the tree fell, I've been in high winds on canoe trips. The trees literally were falling down. It was a terrifying thud in the earth. And then what follows? Usually silence. But if there's a storm like we had, it was not anything but. But when a tree falls, lumberjack, we were speaking about, the wood chopper, when the tree falls, there's a thud in the earth, and then it's probably pretty quiet afterwards, right? You notice all the sound. You're just a different person all of a sudden. So the earth itself trembled. And then the Torah was given. Now there's tranquility. So that represents a force called Shabbos, a tranquility that you can bring in to all the vicissitudes of your life. All the ups and downs, the whole roller coaster, you can go through that roller coaster, just fly with it. That's Eved Melech Melech. So I spoke about more yesterday about that idea of tranquility and bringing that in. But here I want to speak about the power to allow that to happen. When do you bring, you're just wax on, wax off is both equally zen to you. You can totally go the ratz and shave, you're good with both, and you see that there's this general pattern, and that recognition itself is a higher level of experience. That's called menucha. You're the peaceful warrior. And then what's the power for that? Chop wood. So now we're saying, what is chop wood? We explained how that made no sense yesterday. And I gave an interpretation. But the idea was to represent this idea of whatever you say, I'll do. Chop wood, maybe the idea is you're going to chop wood and never use the wood. Maybe that's the idea there, and therefore it's completely... I just said that doesn't make any sense at all. You look at yesterday's class about that. But he goes on to explain... First, I'm going to read this prefatory remark. It says, "En durch dem werd der le'echad der Nachman Sheikh Eich in the prate haveda uprate tnuas halev ratzav v'shev. In all your ebbs and flows in life, you're going to have the experience of this oneness, this tranquility. That's what the words are. Menucha and ratzav v'shev. I don't forget which word I was going to translate there. Okay, so in das Vers abgetan durch bittel ha'adam zum dem Eibishter. You want to do this? Nullify yourself to God. So no, I gave a whole class about chopped liver. It doesn't mean that, okay? We're seeing what that means. It means being a king. That's the point here. As erfilt, the kol metziusai is nor an eved l'Hashem. He feels his entire existence is just to be a servant of God. L'shamesh eskaini. As one says, I serve my master. Und dafka derech sein bittel als an eved l'Hashem, specifically through this devotion to God, that's a servitude, vert eved melech melech, then you're going to be a king. Vert ein zach mit mitzias ha-melech. Val derech der perish ha-yadu in chassidus, eif tefilo le'ani. So now the Rebbe explains what he means. And it's a little bit complicated, but it's a simple idea. Do you understand what poor means and rich means? If you understand that difference, you will understand the different mentalities that they engender. One is of need and deference, and one is, I have it all, I'm like the king, okay? So the Rebbe goes through this, and we'll see it's a bit complicated and it's a bit long-winded. So, and I really want to go through every word of it because I didn't prepare a share. Just kidding. This is the idea that I prepared, and I just said, okay, I'll just read it inside. It goes to the whole idea of kavod, again, the chopped liver, that's what it leads up to. But I'm going to stop before that, and you'll continue that with yesterday's class on that topic. So this is what came between it that I guess I didn't think it was a chiddush enough for me to focus on when I first read it. But now I'm saying, if that obviously means that it's very important. So here we're speaking about the difference between the rich and the poor, and what is the proper approach, and how do you become the king? Okay, so we just said it's through devotion to the king, you become the king. So the Rebbe is going to say, we're going to understand the difference between two types of prayers. The prayer of the poor and the prayer of the rich. And that's going to help us understand what this means. Eved melech melech. Okay. So, in Chassidus, there's a well-known distinction of the prayer of the poor, kiyataif, when he bows his head or when he puts his hoodie on, kiyataif, when he goes in prayer in the prayer shawl, v'lifnei Hashem yishbeich sichai, and before God he pours out his conversation, his prayer. As tefillah la'ani, the prayer of the poor, b'shteiten dem, as lifnei Hashem yishbeich sichai, is embodied in the fact that before God he pours out his prayer. From durch dem was steht betachlis bittel, from the fact that he appeals to God himself, and he's therefore in a state of ultimate self-nullification, as we used to translate in the 70s. Sounds weird. Tachlis bittel should be the ultimate state of devotion. You come up with something better. Maybe I'll read some of these words in a second that you've written. In sein Tefillah, davka zu reden mit den Eibishten allein. In his prayer, because what is his goal in his prayer? He just wants to speak to God. Davka zu reden mit dem Eibishten allein. That's what it's all about. The fact that he specifically wants to speak to God himself, because it's lifnei Hashem, he's doing it to the pnimius of Hashem. Whatever you want, Hashem, that is why I'm praying to you. I just want to be connected to you. I want to be your servant in some way. Let me be part of your life. You're telling God that, and because of that, that's called the tefillah of the ani, the prayer of the poor. It's recognizing I lack everything because I just want you, and then that's a poverty because you feel like, isn't that a sense of, it's almost like a painful cry, but here we're saying it's like devotion, and the prayer is to connect to God, or to speak to God, whatever exactly that means. I want to interpret it in the 666, Tafshin Samak Vav, of the Rebbe Rashab, that it means God speaks to us through our lives. That's the way I want to understand it based on that. That's the way you connect with the very essence of God, in fact. The highest level of God, that when it's for the purest motive of all, it's just because you're interpreting your life as a conversation with God. So that's what I want to understand, the words of the Rebbe here. Dafka zu reden mit Nebelstein allein. You just to talk to the God. Al derech mashal der chiluk zwischen an asher v'ani kepshutai. This is understood in the difference, in the simple sense of a poor to a rich person. As ashir to libzan hasagan ashiras, that the wealthy person, on account of his accomplishments in wealth, can amal betten de giluim fun de melech, can sometimes request revelations of the king, giluyim fun de melech, kesef ezav ki yitzbei. He says, King, you are in charge of gold in this country. I ask for some of that gold that you minted to come my way. Kesef ezav ki yitzbei. Vider melech gefindt sich chutz me'armein shaloi, angetan in levushin, in where the king is found outside of his palace, angetan in levushin, wearing clothes, un arumger ringelt fun sarai hamelech, and surrounded with his entourage, avdei hamelech, tzva hamelech, the servants of the king, the hosts of the king, or the generals of the king, anstatt reden mit melech allein. So, wir gefindt sich allein bechedre, different from when you speak to the king in his chamber. Masha'enken and ani, zu dem was hat, gar keine saga nit in the gilui hamelech. Since the poor guy does not march in that entourage. He's not part of that private club, right? He doesn't get into the VIP room with the king. So when he is with the king, he's not in some foreign environment where the king is with his entourage and the whole public. That's usually the poor person, rather, when he's going in to speak with the king, better red mit melech of mela alain bechedroi. So when it speaks about that, that is alone with the king in his room, in the king's private chamber. Valderek zer is avodas Hashem, in avodas Hashem. So too in the service of God. So now what does this mean? We say a rich person mingles with the king in his entourage. I could have given the exact opposite interpretation, but that's what the Rebbe says here. If you're rich, when you want to see the king, he's in his whole very formal ceremonial presence with all of his entourage, and you never get a private moment. The poor person, when he speaks to the king, he says, I got to have a private word with the king. This is something that I can only tell you in private. It's a very intimate relationship with, and a totally vulnerable moment. I need you, king. Not like I'm just mixing with you because I'm part of your whole entourage and I feel very comfortable around you, but a state of complete vulnerability. That's the ani. Let's see if that resonates with the Rebbe is going to explain here in terms of what does that mean with your service of God. The prayer of the rich person, because of his understanding of the greatness of God, the godless von Seder Hishtalslos, he knows all about Kabbalah. The Malach Sharas, angels, Srafim Chayas Leifanim, the different types of angels, those who burn, those who are passionate like beasts, and the circles, the patterns, the wheels of the chariot, or Fanim. They're like alien style angels, the way I understand it, which doesn't make any sense to me either. Biz, in the Esespheres, so a rich person knows about God's 10 emanations and all these very wonderful angels and understanding of the way all that integrates and comes down to him in this world. Ken bestehen in them as there is all betten the grace of Giluyim Shalamayla. So being in that environment, you say, you know what, God, I want to be on the best parties with angels. I want to see when they're praising you in all this spectacular glory, and I want to sit beside you on the throne, on your ottoman. So you have such an image, and that's the Asher. Wie der Melech gefindt sich, angetan levushin in around So here it means the Rebbe is going back to the mashal again. I don't know. I don't understand why. He's saying the meaning of the allegory of the rich man is that he understands all the celestial realities. So now the Rebbe is stretching it back to, or bringing it back to the angels, that there's thousands and myriads of them, and they serve God. And myriads upon myriads before him stand. Biz as l'gdudav ein mispar, to the extent that if you're talking about each troop of these angels, there's no end to that. There's always new troops popping up to be part of this entourage. Der asher zal beten afilu giluim nailim b'avodas Hashem, or that this rich guy should request even the greatest revelations in the afilu giluim nailim b'avodas Hashem, the greatest revelations in the service of God. Ava v'yira, the fact that he could love God and fear God in a very tangible, real way. That's a very rich thing, to be rich with that. Kesef v'zav ruchniim, which is the spiritual parallel of silver and gold, in that order in this case. V'kiyetzbei, biz the giluyim for the hechste dargas v'sfiras and seder ishtalsos, to the extent of even experiencing the greatest revelations of the 10 spheres in heaven. Was nit kukendik eif sein godless, that notwithstanding their greatness is thus verbunden mit chiluke dargas. This is still subject to a whole spectrum of degree. Nit shuv le'echad. It's not the advice, imratz libcha, if your heart is racing to God, shuv le'echad, return, not just return in general, in some kind of weird back and forth, but rather recognize that whole back and forth is le'echad, is for the purpose of one purpose, God's will. So you, in that sense, you're becoming the servant to God, and that makes you kaviyachol, God himself, and the king himself. Der Eibishter Elaine, Hashem Echad, as the Rebbe says here. Shuv le'echad, der Eibishter Elaine, Hashem Echad, the one God. So it's a recognition of, I'm just part of this incredible higher identity that appreciates my own pratistics. My own, that's probably not proper. Pratistikkeit is probably better. The idea of me being an individual, distinct and unique in my relationship with God, as that is in the appreciation of everything that's outside of that too. So that in other words, I feel a part, an integral part that makes that the wholeness of the world. So feeling that is the ultimate expression of this type of bittul, we call it. And so he doesn't experience the tranquility of recognizing that it's all one, because he's in a world of distinction and totem pole, of the king tut on the top of the pyramid, and then everything else just surrounds that. So everyone has its place. He's caught in that world. Mashen can feel his ani, which is not so by the prayer of the poor person. Azavas, so the rich guy is saying, I have this much glory in understanding you, God, I want more, and he gets more. So what's the poor person's experience? Completely different. He's the menucha, the tranquility, because when you have nothing to lose, that is like a type of freedom that I think is going to be expressive of this idea we're going to read. Mashen can feel his ani. So the prayer of the poor person, the one who stands in a complete state of vulnerability, vianani, like a poor person, is davkutz lib zayin bittul, because of his vulnerability, his bittul, v'heder hasaga in the giluim shalmaylo, and an inability to appreciate the very specific nuances of all the glory of God, but rather he just has the experience of what? B'shteit zayin tefillah in lifnei Hashem yispech is expressed in his prayer being before God, not before the God's palace and the whole spectacle and entourage, but before Hashem. To read mit Melech Elaine, to speak with the king himself, Atzmus Yisparach, the essence of God, as we call it. Aderech ani mispalo l'dazeh, Aderech ani mispalo l'dazeh tinaik. As it says in the Tzemach Tzedek's teachings about prayer, in the name of Makubal, it says, I pray to God like the mindset of a child would have, presumably to his father or his father in heaven here. I just want to daven like a child. I know all this Kabbalah he's saying, but that's not what I want to use when I want to come before God. I want to pray like a poor person, which is like a child who has no understanding of the greatness of his father, the king. A child doesn't know anything about spheres, 10 emanations, Kabbalah, and everything that has to do with descriptions of the way God integrates and affects the world. Norvegen alaka netsuya atzmusis barak. But what does a child understand? A tinek? The existence of God itself, his very essence. Nit shayach shalmala makola hagiluyim v'tayarim. Because a child has no ability to appreciate all the various revelations of angels and all that. He's not interested in that. He says, I want to tuck in from my father, him himself, and not the servant. Right? That doesn't make much sense. So a child approaches with a sincere desire to connect with the person himself and not the trappings. And then it completes this point before going on to about the whole expression of this is chopped liver. The liver is identified with this tranquility within the vicissitudes. I know you learned a new crazy word. And Avram Sheps, hello, how are you? Told me how to pronounce the word unrequited. Probably significant that he should be blessed with all of his heart's desires. So specifically through the ultimate bittul, the ultimate vulnerable approach to the powers that be, a feeling of, God, I cannot do this at this point without your help. That approach to God, for an Eved, like a servant, says, I'm going to use all my energy to serve you. Please have mercy on me and give my existence some comfort by being close to you, because that's the whole purpose of my engagement with you. Was durch dem wird Eved Melech Melech canal. That this bittul brings about the servant of the king is a king. The poor person now is a king. Why? Because he's in the presence of the king, whereas even the rich person even forgets that there's a king behind the whole scene. So what is his wealth? It doesn't become his wealth that he attained through having a good position in relationship with the king. Rather, it becomes the wealth of the king himself. You have some kind of partnership achieved here where you just acquired beyond Chatzia Malchus Veseas. From God's very benevolent, holy hand. Vidas is given by Moshe Rabbeinu. This was by Moshe, as durch sein Bittul B'tachlis, that through his ultimate nullification to God, his devotion, saying, and honestly saying, V'nachnu ma, what are we? Meaning, we are nothing for ourselves. That's not who we live for. We live for a higher purpose. Is by im eich given ashiris. So he also becomes wealthy. It's just not it's not a finite amount of wealth. So you don't call it wealth anymore. You say that you become one with the king and appreciate his wealth because you become the king. Tfilas Moshe, tfilas Asher. That's why even though he's described as wealthy, where did his wealth come from? It came from this impoverishment where one says, I have nothing. I want to be in this world how you want. God, you want, Chas v'shalom, he doesn't want certain comforts in a person's life. That is I'm going to focus on all that you do give me. Okay? So there's a wealth that comes about through that. Remember before we said that in a Yom Yom we got this idea that the response to your devotions are particularized to each individual area. Okay? So all the person's needs are when they connect to the king in this way, where it's shuv le'echad, that the whole will of the king is the whole point, and not just, so in other words, all areas become perfected. Therefore, it's expressive of the singular relationship with him to God being the shuv le'echad, the present in all the details. So all the details, therefore, when that aspect is emphasized, therefore, are fulfilled in the ultimate way, because your wealth, God's wealth becomes your wealth as you unite with the King in the ultimate way. In the Chiluk Dargis from Seder Hishtalshlus, that even in the whole pecking order of creation, which is called Seder Hishtalshlus, the spiritual step-down process, diminishing infinity into the finite experience in the matrix. Okay, we could say that with a straight face now, can't we? It's just become part of our lexicon now. So we call it Seder Hishtalshlus for the card carrying. Und euch in dem Makam von Shinoi V'Tnua hat Shleimus Hamenucha. That also in the most chaotic engaging experiences in life, you also experience the tranquility of this Zen warrior that faces the world. So we have to have the idea of a Jewish warrior that faces the world, that becoming Eved Melech Melech. That you just say, you know what? I'm interested in God, and if God gives me wealth, that's because I'm become one with Him. You have a marriage with God, you have 50%. And Chatzia Malchus. Achashverosh is a humorous character. Everything but when the Mephoshim say the Beis Hamikdash. Just don't make yourself king of the world. He didn't allow that. Don't recognize God as king because Achashverosh, look what they did in 300. Okay, so that means chopped liver, as the Rebbe goes on to say. So I think that's the point. The point is, the slave of a king is a king, meaning unite with the purpose behind the king, and then God will give you the resources to be able to fulfill the ultimate destiny. Is to be shown, like we said in the beginning with the Yom Yom, that the two aspects of reward. One is just particularized to with the areas in your life that you shine, and therefore you're going to be answered in those. And in the general way, which is the point here of Shuv L'Achad, where there's a general connection to God that's most expressed in terms of showing the appreciation of God for your devotion to the time, simply as this connection in a holistic way of a general, all-encompassing experience of the unity of God in everything. So that's going to be lasted lovely. So we're going to achieve that Shuv L'Echad when your experience in all of the vicissitudes of your life, all the ups and downs, is going to be met with the tranquility that is a sabbatical in humanity historically that we're expecting to unfold right after this thing goes away. How does one overpower one's terror at being vulnerable to the Almighty? Serious question. Okay, I'll take it seriously, of course. Even if you meant it as a joke, I would take it seriously. So, how does one overcome one's terror at being vulnerable to the Almighty? The terror comes about in an experience of someone who's trying to attain prophecy, or meditating rather, just to have some people, cut themselves to feel like, oh, wow, there's pain. I'm really alive. I think that people do that to affirm that they exist and that they cannot be completely numbed. They have to be sensitive to something because they feel so punished that they're completely callous, and they do things to get any affirmation of their existence. That's a very terrifying aloneness. But the equivalent in spiritual progress is that type of terror of a prophet who is trying to explore beyond and beyond. So he's going through meditations done through joy, because that is the whole vessel to overcome the terror. Remember, they play music during that experience. So I think that's what you're referring to, because I think you know that the world is on the verge of a global blossoming forth, a renaissance of prophecy. I have no evidence whatsoever. But you didn't care when I did have evidence for things, did you either? So it doesn't matter. What's the difference? Some guy giving his opinion. We are going to see an awakening of prophecy. So I'm saying the opposite mindset of that type of anxiety that leads to things like cutting is the facing the terror of spiritual bliss. That is the spiritual warrior of the prophet. So I think that there's a very huge factor of heroism in that courage to do that, because the whole idea is you are immersing yourself in infinite consciousness. That's terrifying. Okay, if people take acid, they would be completely terrified. Any human being. Unless they're just like, they have this experience like a kid playing with toys. Because that could happen if you're in a certain mindset. Okay, I was a kid once. So the prophet takes a serious, introspective, casting himself into abyss of consciousness and transcendence in order to experience something higher than the greatest billionaire could experience. So how do you overcome one's terror? You have to approach it like you would approach, what if you had the terrifying task of doing 100 push-ups? You do one today, another tomorrow, you'll get to 100. I promise you. You'll get to 100 in 100 days. Hands down, 100%. Okay? So you overcome terror by approaching it in a step-by-step basis. You can't throw yourself into things. You cannot be always tefillani in every area. Take one area at a time. Focus on diet. Focus on going to the right shrink, if you could ever find such a thing. Focus on improving your relationships, or trying to find more alacrity to get a job or something like that. That's very difficult for a lot of people, especially when no one's hiring, right? I have no idea what they do. That's terrifying to me. So when you approach terrifying things, cut them in pieces, be the wood chopper, make a system out of that mess. Put those pieces of wood together to approach it step by step and make a ramp. Okay, because you can't even have that on the going up to the altar. So when it talks about the flesh burning on the altar, which is what they did, that kind of direct experience, sloping incline, straight sloping incline. When it comes to Menorah spiritual things, you could be a little bit daring, right? And you have the steps there leading up to the Menorah. I don't know if anyone's ever pointed that out besides me, but I'd really like to see their take on it. Lynn, good morning. I read a sichel yesterday that the Levim of today will become the Kohanim of the future. Right, that's a beer on Tanya. I've spoke about that. Can you please comment on that? Oh my goodness, I did, I think, 2 days straight. So you have to look that up. It's just a few days ago. Sorry, it was Tanya. What did I say it was? The Kohanim. Yeah, it was Tanya. Yes, you're right. It was Tanya, yes. A rich man cannot stand where a poor man is. That's what it says here, yes. He cannot go into the inner chamber. That's only the poor. You'll go in there poor. Why? Because you throw yourself at the king's mercy and he gives you everything. I think that's the image here. I can't read that word. Melech is 40, 30, 20, which is 450. Looks like it shows the Hishtalshus, water, wisdom, in descending order. 40 would be water, the 40 days of the flood, right? 30 is what? And 20 is... Okay, I'm not quite getting what you're saying there. Because the 40, 30, 20, it's going descending order of tens. Hishtalshus, well, okay, so therefore water descends like that progression of numbers. Okay, so water is melech. A king is like water because he's drawing through his bittul. He's a vessel to contain a lot of fluid, which is what water represents. It's the iris became the fact that you can take from something high and pour it down to low. Okay, so that's the wrap. I forget what the title was. I wrote it somewhere, but I forget what it is. Here. No, it's not the chopped liver pate. I almost give it called pate. That would have been really strange. Oh, draw close to the anointed. Oh, I have to... So how do you draw close to the anointed? Who's the anointed? It's king. It's the king who is God. Okay? So Eved Melech, be in the conversation of godliness. Lifnei Hashem, Yishbech Sichai, pouring out your conversation to God. Be in that conversation. Have some appreciation. That's a deference in itself. And by doing that, okay, it's expressive of being a slave. I'll do what you want, master. But in effect, you become the king himself, because you're one with the king. You become the queen, or you become the king himself. It's all one package deal now. So when you're in the environment of the anointed, here we're going to put it in all the context of all what I've tried to explain to you for so many days about Mashiach being a process of, what does it mean, the anointed? It means to be kingly in your world. So when you do that, that is a type of redemption expressive of this idea of Eved Melech Melech, and chopped liver down from there. Okay. Close to the anointed, the Rebbe wanted it to be expressed in the most simple way. Talk about Mashiach. Learn about Mashiach. Talk about Mashiach. He wanted people to care about Mashiach, so he said, learn about Mashiach. It's hard to care about something that seems like a complete fairy tale. How are you supposed to care about that? You could sing all the songs you want on Imamin, but if you don't actually have it as a real force in your world that means something better than just like you have a bigger treasure chest, if you don't understand the depth of what it means, you won't really look forward to it. It doesn't matter if it's not realistic or it's fantastical or it's something that's completely otherworldly and you can't appreciate it. You have to find something about it that is meaningful to you. So to understand the depth of it, and it's not just childish victory I'm going to ascribe victory to my future race or religion or whatever, messianic ideas that the story, we're going to live happily ever after. It's going to be Nucha, Shabbos, L'chaya Elamim, forevermore, sabbatical, and therefore you have utopia is the English equivalent of Mashiach. Utopia. It sounds like baseless optimism, naivete. So when you understand what Mashiach is, which means it's about you being heroic in your world, which I call health, because it's what people are really dealing with. It's the need for introducing health in different areas of the world. But the flip side of that, of concern of health, is heroism. It's just a word that people don't take seriously, so I don't like to say it. But that is really what it's about. Heroism is more like an entertainment now. I want to see a guy who could shoot more people in a second than anybody else. Make my day. And that is heroic. So the word heroism loses its meaning. It means someone who is exemplary and someone that's worthy for you to want to be around. That's the king. Okay? Have a good day, everybody.